right, so we're going to get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Ventura County Freight Corridor Study Public Workshop number 2. My name is Caitlin Brooks, and I serve as the Program Manager for Regional Transportation Planning for the Ventura County Transportation Commission, or VCTC. VCTC is the countywide regional transportation planning agency responsible for transportation planning, programming for local, state, and federal transportation funds, managing and providing transportation programs and services, and setting transportation priorities here in beautiful Ventura County, California. I'll start today's session with a bit of housekeeping, and then Sean Daly from Iteris will provide additional information on the Ventura County Freight Corridor Study. For today's virtual workshop, we'll be using the Zoom webinar platform to share a PowerPoint presentation that provides information on the Ventura County Freight Corridor Study. We will then hold a questions and answer session. The Zoom webinar allows attendees to ask questions using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. You may have to move your cursor to the bottom center of your screen to show the Q&A box function. You may submit questions at any time during the session using the Q&A tool. The questions will be answered during the dedicated questions and answers period. During the questions and answers session, you will be able to raise your hand and be called on to ask questions verbally. We will also be using the polling feature on Zoom today to receive feedback on the study's performance measures. We will start with a sample poll to allow everyone to become familiar with the Zoom polling. Because this is a live webinar, please understand that we cannot control the audio or video quality on your device. As such, we recommend that participants disconnect any unnecessary devices to avoid interference with audio and video quality. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the VCTC website to review. We expect the session to last approximately an hour, depending on the number of questions we receive. To help us generate a sign-in sheet, well, we don't have the chat box function entered today, so we will not have a sign-in sheet, but we will take a note of the sign-in with the participants list. I would now like to introduce Sean Daly with Iteris, the transportation planning consultant who is preparing the Freight Corridor Study. Sean.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. And thank you attendees for being a part of the Ventura County Freight Corridor Study. We're happy you can provide input and help guide how the study will give the county a unified direction in freight mobility. The Ventura County Freight Corridor Study is a joint study of 4 public agencies, the Ventura County Transportation Commission, VCTC, the Port of Hueneme and Caltrans partnered with the Southern California Association of Governments to identify and prioritize important freight corridors for safer, more efficient, and sustainable freight connections. We're talking to residents, businesses, and community groups to guide the development and direction of the study. So we're available throughout the study to talk with you about your issues, comments, and questions. And we have this schedule to sort of line up our technical work while we come to you in workshops so that while we're looking at the data to develop solutions, they'll fit within the values and unique conditions of different parts of the county. This is the second of 3 workshop events. In February, we talked about the existing conditions and the project goals to provide information about where existing challenges are located and the big picture of what the study is intended to do. Today, we're going to return to talk about performance of solution options and some examples of needs and opportunities to help focus investments in the right ways and in the right places. In April, we're putting it all together and presenting a draft study to you. And then in May and June, the study goes to the Ventura County Transportation Commission and the Board of Harbor Commissioners for presentation and approval at their respective public meetings. So thank you. We're going to start out with your feedback from the last workshop, which included comments and questions at the meeting, as well as follow-up emails and phone calls. Based on what we heard, we've made some changes. First of all, we expanded the discussion of warehousing that was based on interest around the Sakioka Farms development and the new Amazon warehouse. There is about 60 million square feet of existing warehouse space in Ventura County, and the proposed Amazon warehouse is going to be about 2 million square feet. We're also taking more of a look at efforts to reduce speeds through enforcement and education as many of the infrastructure improvements that are going to be recommended through the study are going to take years to implement, and obviously don't want to wait too long for conditions to improve. We also changed how we're looking at disadvantaged communities so that El Rio, Nyland Acres, Satakoy, and more neighborhoods in Oxnard, Moore Park, and Fillmore are included as we look at those communities. And then we added the National Hazardous Materials routes, which are another type of truck route, onto our truck route map. The difference from what we showed before, it's actually on the sides in the red there, is that from the port area, the hazardous material route only follows the port primary corridor to Rice Avenue, and instead of turning north on Rice to go to US 101, it continues on Hueneme Road to Las Posas and then north to 101. So backing up, what is the freight corridor study? We're taking a pretty broad definition of freight, which is anything transported that is not people, whether it be carried by trucks or rail to and from the port or farms or delivered to homes and businesses. Corridors are the paths on the freight by which the freight is moved. So that would be roads or rail primarily. And then we're using this study as a collaborative process to help guide how freight transportation is considered and addressed in the county. The process is as important as the study itself. It brings together people throughout the county and take a role in making that future. And from my perspective, we can look at data all day long, but it only really tells us the way things are. And so if we put the community front and center, we can make choices about the way things should be. These are the objectives of the study. Because freight movement is an important issue, VCTC and its agency partners are taking a fresh look at these issues to inform investment decisions. This study is looking at the entire county where improvements can be made around freight movement. Transportation infrastructure does last a very long time, and we don't have the resources to build everything we want. So we really need to have a good understanding of the importance of freight corridors and where we can prioritize investments to promote the county's industry and agriculture, while also being good stewards of the environment and mindful of the health of residents. The first of our two topics today is performance measures. Under each of the study's goals, more detailed performance measures indicate how solutions will be assessed and prioritized. We're presenting them today, and they're also posted on the VCTC website, goventura.org/VCFreight. It's under the resources tab. And it has a survey that's like the polling we're going to do today in the workshop. So if something comes up later, you can go ahead and do that survey at a later point. So performance measures take the goals of the study and they break them down in more detail to identify, measure, and compare issues and solutions. This is to help build consensus around priorities for the future. We want to look at them now with you and go through detail to describe them, and followed up by polling where you can choose your top two priorities under each goal. So these are the goals themselves. We presented them at the last workshop. They align with the 2020 California Freight Mobility Plan, which itself aligns with the National Multimodal Freight Policy and Strategic Plan. And it puts the county in a position to pursue opportunities for state and federal funding. We developed draft performance measures under each of these goals based on the California and national freight plans, as well as Ventura County specific stakeholder outreach and VCTC policies. So we're going to discuss each of the goals and performance measures one by one, and then again have you select the two highest priority performance measures under each goal. And that's really just to help us guide priorities and areas of emphasis for the study. We're also going to have, it's also sort of an exercise and a demonstration of the trade-offs and balance needed when improvements are designed and implemented. So we're going to start off with two warm-up polls. One is, where do you live? And so go ahead and select that and submit it. And you may have to scroll down, just a note. Oh, and
Both
then the
both
second one is
questions
the
are
most
up, so they can answer
Yeah,
both
sorry,
questions.
both questions are up. Now that I scroll down. So the other one is, where do you travel to most often? That could be for work or school or other activities outside of the house. So yeah, you would click one in each. And Caitlin, I don't get a pop-up as to how many people are.
We have about 28 of 37, so I think I'm going to end it here.
Okay, great. So definitely leaning Oxnard, but really a lot of areas represented. A lot of people living in Oxnard going to Ventura, presumably, and Port Hueneme. So, okay, great. Okay, so we're going to do a similar exercise for each of them. Don't get too stressed out. There's no real right answer for the performance measures. I think it's more of a general direction type thing. So there we go. Okay, so the first goal is multimodal mobility, and we're just going to focus a little bit on that term multimodal because it means different things. In transportation planning, multimodal means balancing different travel demand for all modes: autos, trucks, buses, trains, bicycles, and pedestrians. But in the freight industry, it's a contractual term. It's the movement of goods using more than one type of transportation, like usually ships or air or trains, under one contract. And then another term that's related is intermodal, which is where you're having freight in a container, and it's using different types of transportation under separate contracts. So that same term means different things. But in terms of this study, we're really looking at multimodal mobility, meaning all modes. So trucks, trains, buses, ships, that kind of thing. And here's the breakdown of that multimodal mobility goal and its several performance measures. So the first performance measure is identify the causes and solutions of freight bottlenecks. So examples would be adding a passing lane or turning lane or second rail track. The second one is invest to optimize system performance to improve reliability and speed of freight and enhance regional competitiveness. Three is develop, manage, and operate an efficient integrated freight system that leverages existing assets. Four is freight rail network operational improvements and options that shift freight to movement from truck to rail. Five is improve the Port Hueneme intermodal corridor and Navy-based Ventura County mobilization corridors. Six is coordinate mobility improvements among responsible agencies. And seven is improve access to industrial manufacturing and agricultural sites in the last mile of delivery. So now we'll have our poll, and you'll pick your two highest priority performance measures in terms of the mobility of freight. And like I said, there's no right or wrong answers. And frankly, a lot of these have a bit of overlap because we've simplified them a little bit. And so a little bit of the nuance has been lost. But I think for the most part, they are sort of distinct and should reflect priorities as you select them.
We have about half of people have responded, so I'll give it another 10 seconds and then we'll close it out.
Okay, great. Yeah, sort of across the board, nothing jumps out, but yeah, it's a lot about operation reliability. Great. Okay, so the second goal is economic prosperity, and it's really about growing the economic competitiveness of the freight sector through increased system efficiency, productivity, and workforce preparation. Ultimately, the higher the quality of the transportation infrastructure in a region, the lower the cost to do business, and the more economic competitiveness and growth. So here are the 6 performance measures under economic prosperity. One is invest in freight infrastructure projects and operational improvements. 2 is enhance economic activity, freight mobility, unique capabilities, reliability, system resiliency, and global competitiveness. 3 is increase local workforce availability and training. 4 is promote the state and county's competitive logistic advantages. 5 is improve the freight efficiency and increase the competitiveness of the freight system by aligning with the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan, county and local plans. And 6 is promote Ventura County's existing industries, including the strong agricultural economy. So the poll, again, you'll select your 2 highest or most priority performance measures for the economic role of freight mobility.
All right, 10 more seconds and I'll end the poll.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Goal 3 is about supporting strategies that reduce, avoid, or mitigate adverse environmental impacts of the freight transportation system while promoting ecological restoration and approaches in the planning process. One example is the Port of Hueneme providing electric power to ships so that they don't have to burn fuel while they're in port. So here are the 5 performance measures for environmental stewardship. One is to integrate environmental health considerations to improve health outcomes. 2 is minimize air contaminants and pollutants emitted from freight vehicles, equipment, and operations. 3 is reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the county. 4 is assist the Port of Hueneme and Ventura County to move towards achieving state and regional emissions goals. And then 5 is promote sustainable land use planning practices. So you can select your 2 highest priority performance measures for environmental stewardship.
All right, we have just about everyone, so a few more seconds and I'll close it out.
Okay, thank you. So goal 4, we're a little past the halfway mark, is about enhancing community health and well-being by distributing the benefits of the goods movement system equitably. So health equity is about ensuring that everyone has the same access to clean air and water and access to open space and other community amenities. Generally speaking, this means that communities that have a larger role in the freight movement system should not be left out of having bike lanes or parks because transportation funding is far too focused on supporting one mode over another. And so the 6 performance measures under healthy communities are: 1, support cleaner freight and goods movement; 2, prioritize social equity for freight related projects that avoid or mitigate impacts; 3 is conduct meaningful outreach and coordination focused on environmental justice communities with disproportionate burdens; 4 is promote abatement strategies associated with the movement of goods near residential areas and sensitive habitats; 5 is increase social equity by planning for a freight system that is dispersed and not disproportionately centralized around disadvantaged communities; and then 6 is reduce conflicts in accessing schools and open space by providing safe crossings. So please select your 2 highest priority performance measures for healthy communities. Oops.
A few more seconds, then I'll close it out.
Okay, great, thank you. So goal 5 covers safety and resiliency. The focus around safety is around reducing freight-related incidents, while resiliency is about making infrastructure that's reliable during security, disaster, or climate change threats. So the 3 performance measures under safety and resiliency are: 1, reduce incidents, collisions, fatalities, and serious injuries associated with freight movement; 2, provide for the security of the freight transportation system; and 3, support freight resiliency planning. So please select your 2 highest priorities.
Right, a few more seconds, then I'll close it out.
Great, thanks. Goal 6, excuse me, is asset management, and it's about maintaining and preserving infrastructure assets. One common example is pavement condition and wear due to overweight vehicles. It's much less expensive to perform preventive maintenance earlier rather than wait when you have to reconstruct a whole roadway. Pavement condition is monitored and managed, and management identifies opportunities to save on the overall life cycle costs. So the 6 performance measures under asset management are: preventive maintenance, such as rehabilitation and using best practices in doing so. 2 is encouraging preservation of existing network and focusing on roadway investments of the greatest benefit. 3 are improving parking for large vehicles and limit truck parking in residential areas. 4 is establish a more thorough understanding of the freight corridor system in Ventura County and use that knowledge to inform planning and investment decisions. 5 is support research, demonstration, development, and deployment of innovative technologies. And 6 is promote innovative technologies such as real-time information to move freight on all modes more efficiently. So please pick your 2 highest priority performance measures for asset management.
A few more seconds, and then I'll close out the poll.
Thank you. And our last goal category with performance measures is about providing transportation choices and improving system connectivity for all the freight modes. For example, it would be cooperative efforts to improve trip planning and access to the port area. So here are the 5 performance measures. One is coordinate with local and regional partners for decisions. 2 is support new logistics strategies such as inland port facilities and short haul rail shuttles. 3 is improve truck trip planning, coordination, operations, and management. 4 is identify the important freight connections. And 5 is improve port access. So please go ahead and select your 2 highest priority performance measures for connectivity and accessibility.
All right, a few more seconds, and then I'll close out the poll.
Great, thank you. So thank you for that. Now we're going to move on and sort of present the second topic area where we're presenting opportunities and vulnerabilities in 6 different corridors. Overall, we're looking at about 50 corridors in the county, and this is just a snapshot of them. We're also going to go through these 6 fairly quickly, but the intent is to revisit these and other corridors in the Q&A. So the first one is State Route 126 in Fillmore. So it's a major east-west connection. It is a major connection with State Route 23 and experiences congestion that causes drivers to cut through neighborhoods. Caltrans is also working on a bike lane project there right now. State Route 118 in Moore Park is Los Angeles Avenue. It's a main street passing through the city end to end, and it carries a large number of trucks. There have been many improvements to the roadway over the years, including recent improvements to signal timing. Moving west from Moore Park, State Route 118 in Somas is a largely rural highway with a large number of trucks as well. There are areas where lighting and accommodation of turning vehicles is lacking. And there's currently a small commercial enforcement facility slated for upgrade in the next few years located in this section. Santa Clara Avenue is really the continuation of Rice Avenue North from US 101 to State Route 118 through the incorporated area. It mostly passes through agricultural land, but it also passes the Nyland Acres neighborhood, which has driveways that connect directly onto the 40-mile-per-hour roadway. Ventura County will be starting a feasibility study for a widening of Santa Clara in the next few years, which is also an opportunity to examine ways to provide more physical buffering of the roadway from the neighborhood. State Route 33 from Ventura to Ojai provides regional access for businesses along Ventura Avenue from the Stanley Avenue and Shell Road interchanges. These interchanges are quite old and not designed really for large vehicles or for current traffic levels. The merge areas are quite short and cause slowing on the main line of the roadway to allow those slow-moving vehicles to merge in. Hueneme Road is the main connection to the Port of Hueneme. Once it leaves Oxnard, it enters increasingly agricultural areas before becoming Lewis Road near Cal State Channel Islands, and then turning to meet up with US 101 in Camarillo. It starts and ends as a 4-lane roadway with a 2-lane section through the agricultural area. Near Oxnard, crossings of Wainimi Road and access to Ormond Beach is an issue. And there are efforts to improve bicycle and pedestrian connections across the roadway. And finally, one of the things the study did look at were highway rail crossing conditions. This is a list of the highway rail grade crossing locations in the county with the highest predicted potential for incidents. We looked to see if there were any planned improvement at the locations, and in 16 of the 21 locations there were, or are, I should say, 2 of the locations without planned improvements, Upland Road in Camarillo and Spring Road in Moore Park, have had recent upgrades. And then the 3 others without plans on the books for improvement are relatively low volume roadways. So they're much smaller crossings. So our next steps are to listen to your questions and comments, and then to produce a draft study, which we're going to present at the April workshop. And with that, I think that's the conclusion of the presentation portion. And now we're going to transition to our Q&A portion. I did not pop that up. Let's see. We had one typed in. We only had one so far. I guess this is an opportunity if you want to raise your hand and then be unmuted. I suppose if no one wants to be unmuted.
We have a raised hand, so I will unmute a participant and allow them to speak and ask their question or provide a comment.
Great.
All right, Giles, I think if you unmute yourself, you can speak.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. This is Giles Pettifor, the environmental manager for the Port of Wainimi. Just curious, related to the question of infrastructure for the sort of next generation of freight vehicles, specifically heavy duty trucking, and availability of charging infrastructure on various county routes.
Yeah, so we're going to look a little bit at that. There's sort of 2 sides to that. One is the private infrastructure that will need to go in, and then the other one is the public charging infrastructure that will need to be provided. And I think it's sort of a mix of accommodation of those private fleet owners, especially if they're domiciled within Ventura County. But then you've got a lot of potentially regional trucks coming into the county that wouldn't hold the charge all the way to get back. So they're going to need public sites. So that's going to be, I think, part of the big transition to electric vehicles are those charger sites. So yes, that's going to be a major issue looking forward.
So I think we'll start. Amanda Fagan, our Director of Planning and Policy, is going to facilitate the rest of the questions. We have one more hand raised, and then Amanda can start with our questions and answers. So I will unmute Kari or Carrie to speak, and then we'll move to the Q&A function. All right, you should be able, Carrie or Kari, to
unmute.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. What I'm wondering is how I wasn't quite sure where to put it within this structure, but how are you going to prioritize above all else the well-being of the community with regard to basically, especially air quality, as opposed to prioritizing economic gains and expansion? I think it's incredibly important to do that. And I see that we hardly have anyone here who's probably among the people who are most impacted by the effects of having all of this freight operation happening within their air quality vicinity.
Yeah, I mean, the study is balancing all of those and certainly leaning towards ensuring that communities are supported in especially in this transition to hopefully to zero tailpipe emissions vehicles over time. But yes, that is a very big issue in terms of both outreach to the communities and ensuring that our analysis is focused not only on sort of just the straight mobility, I guess the classic way of looking at it, that you're building transportation infrastructure just for transportation's sake, and really looking at holistically in terms of, well, does this support the community's goals for health? Certainly, but also even mobility within the community, and make sure that you're not isolating and cutting off communities. The health issue is a very big one. It's very long term. Involves turnover of the fleets, which takes time. It involves facility upgrades like charging infrastructure that we just mentioned. So it is a very big and big part of this in how we're looking at it.
So to play off of that, how is it that I'm just wondering, how was outreach done to, especially because, for instance, I don't see that this was a webinar that was produced with an option in Spanish. So a whole lot of people in Oxnard don't speak English well, or don't speak English and would have needed to hear this in Spanish. What efforts are made to, to reach and inform and take the input from people who don't speak English?
Well, I'll take that. We have planned a Spanish workshop directly after this workshop, a webinar that's the exact same presentation in Spanish. And we have Spanish materials available on our website and also broadcast on our Facebook channels to try to reach those communities. And we're distributing it through our channels. We have an email list of regional stakeholders and community environmental groups that we hope distribute this information through their channels as well to try to get the word out and increase participation. It has been a struggle to get participation from the Spanish-speaking community. I think also, to touch on your question earlier, I know Sean responded to it, but I think for the well-being of the community in general, I think that's a huge priority of this study. We don't have all of the answers right now as to how to balance community needs and freight movement and economic, prosperity. We don't know exactly how the best way to balance those two, which is why we're coming to the public to get feedback on what's important to the public. Hearing your comments about community well-being, reaching disadvantaged communities is all really important for us to incorporate into the study, and it's partially why we're here today. But it's definitely a challenge for us to get feedback on these items. But like Sean said, looking at promoting new innovative technology and trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is definitely a goal of this study. And so it's something that we're trying to incorporate, but it's going to take time.
And one further thing before I let you move on to the rest of the people, how is it that we might be able to give more input than is possible on these fairly restricted polls?
You can always send me an email. My email's on the screen, or you can give us a call. Sean and I have set up multiple calls after our first public workshop with stakeholder interviews. And it's basically to listen to the community. We have like a 30-minute window or longer than that. So you can either send an email, you can fill out a survey on our website, goventura.org/VC-freight. All of the emails come through to us and we incorporated them as part of the study. But if you want to speak on the phone, our phone number is there as well, and we can set up an interview to hear from you. And then if you can distribute this to people that might be interested, we'll take that input as well. And we also look at all of the comments on our Facebook page. So people that use social media, if they want to contact us in that way, it's also another way for us to get those comments.
Cool, thank you. Can you remove the unmute thing so I can close and then go see what else is up?
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for our first two speakers. We do see that we have two additional hands raised, but we're going to go ahead and answer some of these questions that have been submitted through the Q&A box, and then we'll come back to the raised hands. The first question is, what is the county doing to reduce diesel pollution in disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, I guess the the simple and not the simple answer, but I guess part of it is that the authority to change over the fleet, to zero emissions, that's really a statewide policy, and so the county is obviously supportive of that, but doesn't really have the authority to do that. In terms of the vehicles. Now, in terms of where those vehicles go, the county does restrict or have the power to restrict, and cities have this too, trucks to go down certain roadways. And so they do have defined truck routes. And that's another way of limiting the amount of trucks that are passing a specific area. Those are pretty much the two main tools for reducing diesel pollution. Diesel pollution is concentrated around heavy truck use.
The next question, since the state of California passed using solely zero emission trucks by 2045, can we get a head start?
Great. Yes. No. Yes. That's going to. So it's going to take time. So this is going to be sort of that reality of the fleet switch over, and it's not going to be sort of overnight. And there has to be a lot of supportive infrastructure that's installed as well. Because if you can imagine now, if you were to have gas or diesel trucks but no diesel fueling stations, they really can't go anywhere. So likewise with electric, there needs to be a big buildup in that. And there's actual, like, one of the bigger limitations is in the electrical grid. So now that has to be, more rigorous, and the delivery of electricity has to be put in. So hopefully this will also encourage the improvement of the electrical grid as well. And so that will take time. In terms of head start, I think the most important thing is in plans like this, accommodating for that, accommodating for charging locations, accommodating for where you think the demand is going to go, so that we're prepared, so that there isn't some sort of barrier to implementation from on the county side.
I would also add to that. I think as part of the study, we're looking at, how we can get a head start, like Sean said, but this is just looking at Ventura County. And I think in order for us to get a head start, Caltrans also had a freight study underway, and we have to look at it regionally because, as Sean mentioned, looking at the infrastructure and making sure that's there is really going to be a huge part of getting to that point and having the fleet turnover. So this is sort of where we start now, is with a study like this, coordinating with our larger partner agencies, and then going from there.
Thank you. The next question, lots of immigrant farm workers that live near Port Hueneme have no access to health care, and it's in an area that has high rates of asthma. How will health impacts from freight development be measured in these communities?
Yeah, so in terms specifically of this study, it's about improvements within those communities that are, judging that there are improvements that either help the conditions or would not help the conditions. So ones that would, trying to think of a really bad project, that would just wildly increase diesel emissions in the community, that would rate very poorly, versus one that would support a program to encourage zero emissions trucks, which would support reductions that would rate well. So it factors into the prioritization.
The South Oxnard community is cut off from its access to the coast by Hueneme Road. Are there plans to improve coastal access for this community when making improvements to this freight corridor?
Yeah, that's one thing we'd sort of really quickly touched on earlier about access across Hueneme Road, and frankly, any of the freight corridors in the county is very important. And I think one part of this study is going to be pointing out that improvements to freight corridors aren't just sort of that linear, make it wider, make it faster for trucks. It's really about, well, if you improve those crossings for the people who want to cross, you're actually improving conditions for everybody. It's an economic benefit, it's a social benefit, it's a health benefit. And so, in the details of that would look like ensuring that they're just safe and efficient crossings that are, as protected as possible for the vulnerable pedestrians and bicyclists that they're trying to cross these freight corridors.
Next question, how can companies be encouraged to switch over to zero emission technology sooner rather than later? And how can the county support investment in infrastructure for electric trucks?
I think the most encouraging would be funding to do so. I do know that a lot of companies are starting to look at it. And a lot of the very large companies have had pilot projects in locations to sort of test them out, especially like delivery companies like UPS and FedEx have looked at this and looked at more sustainable ways of delivery, including cargo bikes or zero emissions electric vehicles. They'll look to apply those. I think it's going to be sort of, I don't want to say uneven, but I think as companies adopt them, it'll take some time. And mostly, frankly, they're adopting them because they're required to in a lot of places, or required to look at it. So that strong regulatory regimen to encourage it while providing financial incentives are pretty much the way that is going to encourage that fleet turnover to zero emissions.
I would also mention that VCTC and many other partners throughout the county of Ventura are participating in a grant application that will hopefully become a funded study that will look at the deployment of zero emission vehicle infrastructure from a regional perspective, looking at the whole Central Coast, trying to identify any barriers or gaps that exist in the current planning and approach to deploying the infrastructure that would be needed in order to meet those the demand for zero emission vehicles as well. The next question, what is going to be done to protect the health of residents near the Port Hueneme? Our community is disproportionately affected already. We need to have our health protected.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our little slice of that overall health equation, yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, we're looking at prioritizing that community among other communities in the county that are disproportionately burdened by freight movement, but also just other pollution sources in general. So it isn't just like we're focused just on freight. I mean, it could be that the community has a high level of traffic going through it in general. And we're sort of prioritizing projects that improve conditions in those areas.
Thank you. The next question, what will this study result in? Is it trying to inform the port and Caltrans on their various projects? Is this a part of the port's EIR for the port expansion?
So I can take that. This is,
okay.
It's not as part of the port's EIR for port expansion. The study is being done through a grant from Caltrans, a sustainable transportation planning grant, which is really looking at transportation planning. It'll result in prioritize project list and performance measures to look at where to prioritize future transportation investments. So for example, getting funding through the state or federal funding, or if we wanted to come up with a competitive grant application, we would take a look at this study and projects that are planned or on the books and put that in an application. And this study would help us be competitive in competing for state or federal funding. So that's really supposed to be the outcome of this study, is getting a better understanding of freight movement in the county and then being able to compete for future funding, because in Ventura County, we don't have a local transportation sales tax. So we're at somewhat a competitive disadvantage in terms of being able to provide a local cash match for projects. And so studies like this are really important for us to be able to prioritize transportation investments and inform decision makers on what the public has seen as important for transportation investment. And that's as part of what the outcome is going to be, is going to look long-term at infrastructure improvement projects.
Thank you, Caitlin. The next question, how are you going to encourage companies to invest in clean energy technology?
I mean, I think building on what we said earlier and what Amanda said about, being a funding partner and looking for opportunities to be a viable funding partner in improving clean energy technology is certainly probably the most encouraging thing.
The next question, South Oxnard and Port Hueneme, where I live, is a residential area. How can we make these pathways more accessible for residents? I love to walk to the beach, but it's hard to walk there without a sidewalk and would prefer to see more ocean and less trucks.
Yeah, I think that's talking about the crossing Hueneme Road and projects. And I was going to look it up, but I don't want to sort of interrupt. I think there's a county project to improve connections south of Hueneme Road to Ormond Beach. We'll make sure in the next presentation to highlight those efforts. I think anytime there's an improvement project that's going to be done, elements that can benefit different types of users are sort of on the table. So anytime you see, say, a road widening project, that's actually an opportunity to improve crossings, to make sure that pedestrians are accommodated, to maybe put in bike lanes. So I would just encourage people when we get, not this project, but when there are actual specific projects being done, it certainly is an opportunity to get involved and make sure that the specific elements that are really, really important are included.
The next question, can there be a fee charged for diesel trucks and use that fee to pay for environmentally friendly infrastructure?
I guess there sort of is. There is a fuel tax there. I think there's a different registration fee for them. They certainly are charged more than other types of vehicles. And that goes into the transportation funding accounts. So in a way it does. It probably doesn't necessarily I have to look into that, exactly how that money's split up. But it essentially does. There are many ways in which transportation is funded. Sort of a diminishing source of that is gas tax or diesel tax, which is slightly different than gas tax. That used to be how almost all transportation was funded. And that tax rate has been frozen for a very long time. And that's why you see the sales tax measures as a way of supplementing that gas tax, but that continues to be sort of the primary driver of funding for transportation projects.
How can high pollution companies be held accountable to cleaning up our air?
Yeah, I think that's something the South Coast Air Quality Management District does take pretty seriously. They have programs for mobile emissions, which would be vehicles, and stationary source, things like power plants, major emitters. So they're generally, at least for air quality, they're monitored and have to provide reports. In terms of other types of pollution, they have monitoring systems put in place as well. But I mean, lots of good progress has been made. It's sort of a success story in a lot of air pollution reduction, such as removing leaded gasoline and that sort of thing. And hopefully sort of that model is followed for greenhouse gases and particulate matter, which are kind of right now the major pollution emitted.
And just a quick note on that, Sean mentioned the South Coast Air Quality Management District. We're in the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District, which is the same entity in Ventura County, but they have the same programs underway and they monitor air quality in the county for our region.
My apologies. Who foots the bill for increased road maintenance required for heavy trucking? If it is the taxpayers in specific districts, and these happen to be lower income neighborhoods, that does not seem equitable.
Road maintenance is funded through a variety of sources. there's the overweight, the trucking scales, and there's fees involved with that. And that in theory is paying for road maintenance for heavy trucking on the Caltrans facilities. There certainly is just general maintenance that is paid by general taxpayers, general fund taxes. And then there are taxes placed on other specific uses as well. But yes, I mean, in some sense, a lot of road maintenance, especially on local roads, is paid by city or county taxpayers.
I agree. There's a lot of local taxpayers that goes to local roads, but after SB1 was recently passed, that has paid for a lot of repaving of roads locally. It's been distributed to the cities. I believe, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but that also helps, which is the gas tax, SB1, which helps repaving of roads and maintenance for local cities.
Thank you. We've gone through the first 13 questions, and I want to get to our two very patient folks who've had their hands raised. So I'm going to reach over here to Jonathan Ullman, and if you would like to ask your question.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Ullman. I'm with the Sierra Club. I just wanted to say that I think it's great that CARB has, said that we have to have all electric diesel trucks by in 24 years. But my question to you is that it seems like there's a lot going on that might actually speed this up. I'm seeing, Volvo doing all these tests, Tesla coming out with their big rig. What can you do to speed up this process in addition to CARB? And also my other question is, since it seems like, if there's a public health hazard, and there certainly is one related to this. I mean, it's the number one group 1 carcinogen, and leading to lung cancer. Why wouldn't you actually tie in the amount of freight with the ability to electrify? In other words, if you can't protect the health at the current levels, then why not keep it at the same levels until you can electrify? Like put a cap on growth until you've got all your fleet electrified.
That's an interesting approach. I mean, in terms of the legal jurisdiction and the ability of the county, it's really getting to interstate commerce. So that's like essentially a federal policy to meet, essentially meter the volume of freight, which is, very hard, as you know, to change. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the trade-offs of capacity and looking at the environmental emissions and that sort of thing, I think you're right in terms of that there's a part of it is volume. Part of it is just the equipment and, upgrading the equipment and making sure that, these are pretty new. Electrification is really just getting off the ground in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of great work that has shockingly happened even in the last handful of years that have gone on in terms of absorbing a new technology. And a lot of work has gone into it. So I think it is something in process, probably not as fast as any of us want, but there's a lot of people working on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Sean. I'll next go to Lucia Marquez. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question or submit your comment.
Yes, thank you. And I'll be quick given that we don't have much time, but I think a vulnerability that I saw missing in the presentation was the issue around the misclassification of truck drivers when it comes to the freight industry. I think we're seeing like trucking companies and brokers and other contractors willingly misclassify drivers because it allows them as employers to avoid paying wages and benefits and even the cost of equipment. And so as we're moving towards the transition to electric trucking, that puts this workforce in a really vulnerable way where it's on them to really move California to meeting these new state goals and mandates in a way that is kind of unfair because of how common misclassification is. And so I'd really like to see that part of the issues and vulnerabilities and an opportunity for us to explore to protect labor when it comes to this study.
Do you mean in terms of as contractors? Classifying them not as employees, but as contractors?
Yes, it's classifying them as independent contractors, correct.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, the Port of Los Angeles had experience with that when they had a very strong program to electrify vehicles, and they tried to do so, but they had so many independent owner operators that they couldn't really, because usually the mechanism is you do through a lease agreement or some kind of operating agreement with an overall company, but with so many independent owner operators, it was hard. And then they tried to pool them under collective groups, and that had labor implications. So it's definitely an issue, and that's part of the mechanism, to require electrification, and it will be in the meantime before there's a full requirement. So it's a multifaceted issue beyond even the issue of wage and benefit conditions as well with drivers. So yeah, we can include that in and expand our section when we talk about workforce issues.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucia. The next question is I guess more of a comment from to partner along with Jonathan Ullman's comments. He's provided a study for us to read, and we'll certainly include that. Thank you for that recommendation. The next question I think is probably for Caitlin. There are less than 40 participants on this webinar. How are you going to reach out and get a larger cross-section of affected residents?
So yes, there are about 40 participants on this webinar. I think it's hard for us. We're always challenged in trying to get additional participation, especially in a virtual format. We've seen a bit of increased participation because people don't all have to drive to one meeting place. But I think we can always do better. We're going to try to share it through our social media. We share it with our partner agencies in their cities and environmental groups. We have a stakeholder list that we email all of this meeting information to. And even if you can't make the meeting, we have the survey available on our website. And we're always happy to hear from you either by phone or email. I think it's been hard for us to compete for attention virtually with the freight corridor study, with everyone being virtual and being in a pandemic. It can be a challenge for us to get attention of our residents in Ventura County through social media. But I think, we're always looking for ways to try to increase participation. So even spreading the word, our attendees on this webinar tonight, when you see our upcoming workshop for our April 15th webinar, you can share it and tell people, word of mouth. We're always looking for help. We have a limited budget on what we can do with this study. We're trying our best to get the maximum amount of outreach. But we're always trying to do better. So we're open to any suggestions that you might have to try to reach a larger audience. But I'm hopeful that by posting this webinar online, that we can get even more feedback when we share it on social media and email it out to people. They can watch and see the questions and send us their comments or questions to our email. So I think that's what we're going to try to do for the next one. But we have gotten an increase in participation from this workshop, from our first workshop. So hopefully our next workshop will be even better.
And thank you, Caitlin. And I'll also mention that Carrie's added some additional comments related to the timing of holding webinars outside of the general working hours to facilitate additional community participation. So thank you for that as well. The next question, how will we/you promote or require the new technology?
Yeah, so that's going to be essentially state law, and so that's how it's going to be required. As far as promoting, I think it is creating funding programs, grant programs. A lot of trucking businesses operate on pretty thin margins, and so if the fleet turnover time isn't in the normal cycle of business, that's going to be very difficult for them to do. And so bridging that funding gap may be a big part of that.
And we've also heard from some community groups that have tried to partner with local businesses to start these pilot programs with funding, subsidy funding to help them get started with new technology, to show them that it's not that much more expensive to use new technology. And there's a lot of pilot programs, like Sean mentioned, happening even with hydrogen fueled trucks in the Port of LA, I believe, in Port of Long Beach. And I'm not sure if there are any coming in the Port of Hueneme. I would have to check, but I think, like Sean said, that's one of the ways that we can try to encourage people to transition to zero emission trucks.
Yeah, and I will say, without that state mandate, I mean, it would be next to impossible. So they're really the drivers of that.
Next question, can we charge companies who use diesel trucks an extra fee, but the big companies and not truck drivers or small businesses?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, like I said, that there are various fees and taxes placed on diesel in addition to what you would pay as a normal auto user. And they're not scaled, I do not believe, to the size of business. So that's an interesting thought. The county doesn't really run those taxes, but we'll write that down as a thought.
Thank you. The next question, in terms of accountability for corporations who are the big polluters, the monitor measures are great, but to what end? How are the measures holding the companies accountable to help clean up the environment and air? And there are two additional comments here. I would also like to hear how we can actually hold companies accountable.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the air quality management districts do that and have that authority. I think they do monitoring. They do respond to inquiries about emitters. I think we'll probably see a new regimen in terms of in that transition to an electric fleet, where there's going to be sort of enforcement around that. Much as like we see vehicle enforcement for overweight vehicles, expired registration, all of that, you know, probably the type of vehicle propulsion will be, you know, brought into that management and monitoring and enforcement area.
And I'll just add, after our previous question, Giles from the port noted that the Port of Hueneme is partnering with Toyota and Kenworth on getting a hydrogen fuel cell truck in operation at the port this year. So that's also good news for what's going to be coming in Ventura County.
The next question, with the coming of Amazon on Del Norte, what is going to prevent similar traffic like we've already seen on Ventura Boulevard? Trucks will use Ventura. Oh, it moved. Sorry.
Yeah.
Trucks will use Ventura to get to Rice and Santa Clara.
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be an issue. We did look at that traffic study. It was a little limited in terms of the exact details, but yes, a lot more loading onto Del Norte, and that's, as you know, a pretty old design. It's also quite close in proximity to Rice, the Rice interchange, so that's an issue. So that will be a coming thing. They have a number of mitigations as part of that project. Improving the area roads, but that really is not, you know, changing the demand that will be there. So there will be an uptick in trucks. Those are mostly because it's local delivery. It'll be Ventura County deliveries, so they'll be all within the county. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really the way we deal with it is looking at the forecasted demand and making sure that improvements are in place before those facilities come in to ensure that they're accommodated. So.
And there's been an additional comment added here that more concerned with Ventura Boulevard than actually Del Norte. So I don't know if familiar looked at the impacts of the Amazon facility to Ventura Boulevard, but that's something we could look at.
Okay, yeah, I think we more were concerned with. Oops, sorry, I disconnected my screen share. I'm sorry about that. I can pop up our thing again. Yeah, we will add Ventura Boulevard to that.
The next question, what funding sources will be needed to start construction? Biden's infrastructure bill and the county, and will the county have matching funds to hire local workers?
That is a good question. I think that there are probably likely to be provisions in there about hiring locally, but as a federal program, I'm sure that's probably going to be more of a state or national program. But in generally speaking, transportation funds are viewed as very advantageous economically because it's construction jobs. Those are mostly local jobs, and then it's facilitating local businesses.
The next question is also related to workforce. How can local residents who reside in these disadvantaged communities obtain these well-paying jobs?
Yeah, there are a lot of good programs out there for hiring locally and making sure local communities are involved that are good templates for that. So we can include that in the study.
The next question, are you connected to the proposed expansion of the facility on North Olive Drive, which has been classified as a super emitter? And what can you tell us about how the air in that facility is monitored? I mean, I can answer that question. I don't think that we're at all connected with the study to that facility. I'm not familiar with it. Caitlin, I don't know if
no, I'm not familiar with that project either. We can look into it, but we're not. It's not a part of this freight corridor study.
The next question, why do hazardous materials take a different route and not turn on rice?
That's a good question. It's probably a bit of a legacy thing that that's probably part of it. Another issue is hazardous material routes. They like to avoid any overpasses or bridges. So they tend to take slightly less traveled than you would think routes, but we can look a little more into how that's defined. And if that is really a legacy thing that it doesn't go up rice because at the time rice was not State Route 1, that's one issue. If it's definitely going down Las Posas because it's avoiding things on rice because it's more populated or that sort of thing, then that's obviously the different answer.
And then the related question, and will that change when Rice Road rail crossing is improved? And I think that's the same answer there. Yeah,
it definitely isn't going to change that. That the Rice rail crossing is a project that's sort of actively being, essentially is it final design, but it's in, that's definitely in process and going to be built and not going to be held back for that kind of reason.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you everyone for your excellent questions and comments. This has been really helpful to us. We don't have any more open questions, and I don't see any raised hands, but I'll give you all a moment. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or submit a question through the Q&A box. And if there are no further questions, I'll turn it back over to Caitlin.
Thank you. So just to reiterate the study schedule, our final planned public workshop is April 15th. We will present the complete draft of the Ventura County Freight Corridor study for feedback. We are always available for questions, comments. If you want to set up a stakeholder interview, you can go to our website, goventura.org/vcfreight, or send us an email. You can send it to me at cbrooks@goventura.org, or give us a call. It's never too late to submit your comments or questions. And so with that, on behalf of VCTC, we really thank you for your time this evening. We appreciate you being here with us. We'll be posting a recording of this webinar on our website. Have a great evening, stay safe, and we look forward to receiving any additional questions or feedback and seeing you at our next webinar on April 15th. So thank you.